Before any star existed, before the first grain of cosmic dust, before time had a name, he was already there, the most glorious being God had ever created, full of light, perfect in wisdom, crowned in splendor. And then, in a moment that splits eternity in two, everything changed. This is the story of what happened before the world existed. Consider the perspective of what it means to think about something that existed before the universe, not before the earth, not before the solar system, before the universe, before space, before matter, before physical light crossed any vacuum. Modern cosmology speaks of approximately 13.8 billion years as the estimated age of the visible cosmos. But the biblical texts point to a reality that existed before all of that, an inhabited, organized, hierarchical reality, a spiritual realm with its own inhabitants, its own functions, its own internal order. Beings created before any atom condensed into matter, before any subatomic particle vibrated in the fabric of space-time. These beings are called in the Hebrew texts B'nai Ha-Elohim, sons of God. In the book of Job, when God questions the patriarch about where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid, the implicit answer is that there were witnesses in that moment. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy, they were there, before the earth, before the stars, before the material universe took shape. There was an inhabited spiritual realm, and when God created the physical cosmos, that creation was accompanied by a chorus of beings who already existed and who watched the creative act with joy. Consider what this represents in terms of scale. All of humanity, all of recorded history, all the civilizations that flourished and disappeared, all the accumulated technology, all the art, all the philosophy, all the theology, all of it occurred within a universe that already had, before its creation, a parallel and anterior reality, a realm inhabited by beings of a nature radically different from the human, more ancient than anything material, created directly by the hand of the Creator before the very stage of human history was built. And among all these beings, there were categories. The biblical texts establish an angelic hierarchy that is, in itself, a fascinating cosmology. There are the seraphim, described by Isaiah in the 6th chapter with 6 wings each, inhabiting the immediate presence of God, whose voices make the thresholds of the temple tremble when they proclaim the divine holiness. There are the cherubim, complex figures with multiple faces and multiple wings, guardians of the throne, beings that Ezekiel describes in one of the most extraordinary and visionary texts of all Hebrew scripture. There are the messenger angels, the guardian princes of the nations, the countless celestial armies that the texts describe as the hosts of the Lord. And then there was one who stood above them all. The Hebrew texts use the name Helel ben Shashar, son of the dawn, or he who shines, or bearer of light. The Latin tradition, in translating this text into what would become the Vulgate, consecrated the name Lucifer, derived from 2 words. Lux, meaning light, and fere, meaning to carry or bear, the bearer of light. Not the creator of light, God is the source of all light, but the carrier, the conductor, the instrument through which divine light radiated through the spiritual realm with an intensity without precedent in any creature. The prophet Ezekiel, writing around the 6th century before Christ, while he was in Babylonian exile with the people of Israel, recorded one of the most detailed and at the same time most disturbing descriptions ever made of this being. In the 28th chapter of the book bearing his name, Ezekiel directs a lament to the king of Tyre, a historical monarch known for his extraordinary arrogance and for his wealth accumulated through maritime trade. But something happens in the middle of this lament. The text goes beyond the human king, as if the historical figure were merely the surface of something far older and far deeper. as if the king of Tyre were a distorted echo of a spiritual reality that preceded him by millennia. And what Ezekiel describes when he accesses this deeper plane is simply mind-stopping. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. That is the opening statement, and it admits no gradation. Not, you were very wise, or you were extremely beautiful. The seal of perfection, the standard by which excellence was defined and measured in the celestial realm. The most complete, most elaborate, most intense creature that the creative power of God had ever produced. And the description continues with an inventory of precious materials that covered his existence: sardius, topaz, diamond, beryl, onyx, jasper, sapphire, emerald, carbuncle, and gold. 9 precious stones mentioned. 9 materials of supreme value forming part of the constitution of this being. To grasp what this represents, consider that in the traditions of the ancient Near East, precious stones were not merely decorative ornaments. They were symbols of cosmic power, of connection with the divine, of authority over specific domains of reality. The high priest of Israel wore a breastplate with 12 precious stones, each representing one of the 12 tribes, the maximum of authority and representation that a human could carry. Lucifer carried 9 of these stones as part of his own nature, not as an external adornment, as an internal constitution, as the way in which divine light interacted with his spiritual substance, fragmenting into every possible frequency, radiating in all directions, filling the celestial realm with a presence that had no parallel in any other creature. Imagine a being whose essence refracts light in every frequency of the spectrum simultaneously. The deep red of ruby, the eternal blue of sapphire, the intense green of emerald, the absolute gold of pure gold, not in sequence, not alternately, but simultaneously, a visual symphony that was the natural expression of his existence. Every movement, every manifestation of his presence transformed the spiritual environment around him. And the text of Ezekiel adds a detail that still today divides theologians, Hebraists, and biblical commentators into radically different schools of interpretation. The workmanship of your timbrels and your pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created. The translation varies according to the manuscript and the interpretive school, but the majority of the oldest commentaries, both rabbinic and patristic, converge on a surprising understanding. Musical instruments were a constitutive part of the nature of this being. Not that he possessed instruments, not that he was a musician in the human sense of the word, but that music was inseparable from his existence, that every aspect of his presence, every manifestation of his nature, generated harmony as a natural byproduct, that he was, in some profound sense difficult to articulate in human language, a living instrument. Consider what this means in the context of an entire realm inhabited by beings created to worship. The book of Revelation speaks of myriads and thousands of angels around the throne, numbers that the human mind cannot truly process. The word myriad in Greek means 10,000, and myriads of myriads would be 100 million multiplied by something that the texts suggest is again uncountable. An army of worshippers whose numbers exceed any human comparison. And among all of them, conducting, harmonizing, integrating, was Lucifer, the principal instrument of a worship that resonated throughout the spiritual universe since before the creation of the material cosmos. He was not merely one worshipper among others, he was the conductor of all celestial worship. Ezekiel then adds the most specific and most astonishing element of the entire description. You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Every word in that sentence carries a specific weight. Cherub, Not a common angel, not a messenger, not a spiritual being among thousands, the highest category of the angelic hierarchy. The cherubim are those who inhabit the immediate presence of God, who cover the throne with their wings, who guard access to supreme holiness. And among all the cherubim, Lucifer was the anointed one, set apart, designated, chosen for a function without equivalent in all of creation. The term anointed in Hebrew, mimshach, carries the idea of something spread, expanded, encompassing, as if his covering, his protection, his presence extended over something of supreme value. And the text says, who covers? Covers what? The throne, the Creator, the holiness that is at the center of all existence. Lucifer was not merely the most glorious being in creation. He was the designated guardian of the most holy presence in all of reality. He inhabited the most exclusive address in the spiritual universe. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Scholars have debated for centuries the exact meaning of this expression. Some interpret it as the immediate region of the divine throne, where the holiness of God radiates with such intensity that the very spiritual substance seems incandescent, where the creative presence is so concentrated that the space around it seems to consume any impurity. Others understand it as a description of the primordial cosmic forces, the creative potential of the universe in its rawest state before matter organized itself into stars and planets. But all interpretations converge on one point. This being inhabited the place as close as possible to the Creator, closer than any other creature had ever come, closer than any human being would ever come before the redemption that was still in the future of history. And Ezekiel confirms with a sentence that carries all the tragedy in just 2 clauses. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you. Till iniquity was found in you. It was not a design flaw. It was not a manufacturing error. It was not carelessness on the part of the Creator. Lucifer was created perfect. The Hebrew word tamim means complete, whole, without defect, without lack. And he remained perfect for a period the texts do not quantify. He was perfect in his ways. He was exactly what he had been created to be, and then something moved within him, not by external pressure, not by temptation coming from outside. There was no other source of temptation. He was the most elevated creature, and the Creator certainly did not tempt his own creatures. The iniquity was born entirely within Lucifer, from a free choice made by a being who had genuine freedom and used that freedom in a way that undid everything that had been. To understand what happened within Lucifer, one must understand the word that the texts use to describe what was found in him. Iniquity, in Hebrew avla, carries the idea of twisting, of distortion, of something that was straight and was bent. It does not describe a specific act committed at a precise moment. It describes an internal orientation that was altered, a perspective that was inverted, a way of seeing reality that was slowly, gradually, silently distorted until what was clear became murky and what was straight became crooked. And this distortion had a very precise name. The Apostle Paul, writing to Timothy, uses exactly this word when speaking about the danger of placing a newly converted person in a position of leadership in the Christian community. The risk is that the new leader becomes puffed up with pride and falls into the same condemnation as the devil. The same condemnation, as if pride were the original crime, the founding sin, the door through which evil entered, created reality. And the texts of Ezekiel confirm this diagnosis with the precision of a scalpel. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. Observe the internal mechanism described by that verse. The beauty existed. It was real. It was legitimate. It had been given by the Creator. The splendor existed. It was genuine. It was extraordinary. It had been granted. None of these attributes was illegitimate in itself. The problem was not the possession of these qualities. The problem was what Lucifer did with them within himself. He began to contemplate himself. He began to compare himself. He began to measure his own greatness as if it were a property he owned rather than a gift he had received. And at some point in that process of growing self-contemplation, his thinking made a turn that would have eternal consequences. If I am like this, if I have all of this, if I am the most glorious being in all of creation, then why must I serve? The prophet Isaiah, in the 14th chapter, records what many theologians call the interior monologue of Lucifer. The thoughts that fermented in his mind before the fall became irreversible. Isaiah is speaking on the surface of the text about the king of Babylon, just as Ezekiel had spoken about the king of Tyre. But the text goes beyond the historical human figure in the same way it does in Ezekiel, and accesses the spiritual reality that serves as the model for all human arrogance. And what he records are 5 declarations, 5 sentences that begin with the same 2 words that define the core of all rebellion. I will ascend and I will be. I will ascend into heaven. Not to be in heaven. Lucifer was already at the heart of heaven, in the most privileged place in the spiritual realm. The declaration is to ascend above heaven, above everything that existed, beyond any limit established by the Creator, as if there were some place higher than the immediate presence of God, which is, by definition, both a logical impossibility and a spiritual one. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. The stars of God, an expression that the Jewish and Christian theological tradition interprets as a reference to the other spiritual beings, the angelic hosts, the sons of God, who sang at creation. To exalt his throne above all of them, to be the apex of the created hierarchy, not the most honored servant, the absolute sovereign over all other servants. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. The mount of the congregation, the place where God summons, where divine authority is exercised and communicated, where the Creator reveals himself to the created, to sit in that place, to occupy that position, not as a servant summoned by the Master, but as a Lord who summons other servants. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. As if the previous declarations were still not audacious enough to express the magnitude of what was fermenting within him, the highest clouds, a recurring symbol in the Hebrew texts of the divine presence, of the glory that descends, of the majesty that manifests. To ascend above that, to transcend even the symbol of the Creator's presence. And then the 5th declaration, the most direct, the most stripped of any metaphor or symbol, the one that summarizes the 4 previous ones in a single sentence that concentrates the entire structure of pride. I will be like the Most High. I will be like the Most High. Not I want to understand more deeply. Not I want to serve more efficiently. Not I want to grow in wisdom. I want to be equal to God. I want the supreme position. I want absolute sovereignty. I want what cannot be given because it belongs to the nature of the Creator and is, by definition, incommunicable to the creature. The creature can receive gifts from the Creator, can reflect the glory of the Creator, can be filled by the presence of the Creator, but it cannot be the Creator. That boundary is not an arbitrary limitation. It is the fundamental ontological difference between the one who exists by himself and those who exist because they were called into existence. And here is the paradox that lies at the heart of this entire narrative. Lucifer was already the most glorious being in creation. He already had more than any other creature could imagine having. He already inhabited the most privileged address in all of reality. He was already the principal instrument of a worship that resonated throughout the spiritual universe. But it was not enough, because pride has no upper limit. It always points upward, always wants more, always finds a reason to compare with the one above, rather than contemplating with gratitude what it already possesses. There was only one being in the universe that Lucifer could not surpass, and that being was precisely the source of all his existence, all his glory, all his light. The texts do not describe with chronological precision how long this inner fermentation lasted. The spiritual universe does not function like the linear time that humans know. There are no seconds, hours, or years in the eternal realm. But at some point, the internal thoughts transformed into action. The iniquity that had formed in silence overflowed outward, and the being who had been created to lead the worship of all the celestial hosts began to lead something else entirely, a rebellion. The texts indicate that Lucifer did not act alone. His wisdom, which had been given to serve the Creator, was perverted to seduce other spiritual beings. His influence, which had been given to lead worship, was used to lead desertion. The book of Revelation, in the 12th chapter, records that the tail of the dragon swept away a third of the stars of heaven. A third of a number of angels that the texts suggest is practically incalculable to the human mind. A third of those immense hosts was convinced to abandon their position, to break their loyalty, to follow the path that the most glorious being in creation had chosen. Grasp what this represents in terms of leadership and influence. The wisest, most beautiful, most powerful being in creation, someone with centuries or millennia of close relationship with the Creator, with privileged access to the throne, with an unparalleled capacity for persuasion, used all of that to convince a third of the celestial hosts that rebellion was a viable option, that there was something to gain by following the path of pride, that the alternative he offered was superior to the loyalty they had always cultivated. And then there was war. The book of Revelation is direct. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. A war in heaven, not a theological discussion, not a philosophical debate about free will and loyalty. A war. The spiritual universe, which had existed in order and harmony since the creation of the angels, was torn apart by a conflict without precedent in the history of created reality. Michael, whose name in Hebrew literally means "who is like God," a question that is simultaneously a title and a challenge, led the faithful angels against the one who had declared his desire to be like the Most High. The profound irony of Michael's name resonates throughout the entire scene. While Lucifer proclaimed, "I will be like the Most High," the angel who confronted him carried as his name a negation of that very claim. Who is like God? No one. No creature, no being called into existence. And that was the fundamental point that Lucifer had refused to accept. The outcome of the battle was not an unknown for anyone with understanding of reality. A creature, no matter how glorious, cannot defeat the Creator, cannot defeat the armies that serve the Creator with wholehearted loyalty, cannot, by definition, surpass the one whose existence is the source of all existence, whose wisdom is the origin of all wisdom, whose power is the foundation of all power. The battle had a predetermined winner before it even began. What was at stake was not the outcome, it was the choice. And every spiritual being had made theirs, on one side or the other. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Cast out. The word in Greek, ballo, carries the idea of something thrown with force, hurled, expelled violently from one place to another, not a dignified exit, not an agreed departure, a violent and irreversible expulsion. And decades after this text was written, but speaking of an event he had personally witnessed before the foundation of the world, Jesus said to his disciples, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Like lightning, the speed, the intensity, the irrevocability. In an instant, the being who had inhabited the holy mountain of God, who had walked in the midst of the stones of fire, who had been the anointed cherub who covered the throne, was cast out. And with the expulsion came transformation, not merely of position, of identity, of nature. What had been created to bear light came to inhabit darkness. What had been created to lead worship came to lead accusation. And the texts document this transformation through a progression of names that is, in itself, a complete narrative of degradation. Hallel, he who shines, the son of the dawn, the name that evoked splendor and primordial beauty. Lucifer, the bearer of light, the title that described his original function in the celestial realm. And afterward, Satan. The Hebrew word Satan means the adversary, the accuser, the one who opposes, the one who blocks the way, the one who accuses before the very throne he once protected. Devil, from the Greek diabolos, meaning the one who casts down, who separates, who divides, who destroys unity. Ancient serpent, in reference to what would come in the Garden of Eden, where he would use his perverted wisdom to deceive the most vulnerable creatures of the new creation. Dragon, a universal symbol of chaos, destruction and terror, the prince of darkness, the most complete inversion possible of everything he had originally been. Each name is a documented layer of degradation. Each title is the record of a specific loss. The one who bore light came to inhabit darkness. The one who led worship came to lead accusation. The one who covered the throne of God with his wings came to prowl the earth like a hungry lion, seeking someone to devour. The one whose splendor reflected the glory of the Creator came to disguise himself as an angel of light, because that is his only fluent language, the only garment he knows, in order to deceive the creatures he would come to corrupt. And the text of Ezekiel closes the narrative arc with a symmetry that is almost mathematically perfect. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. I will ascend. That was the declaration. You shall be brought down. That was the reality. The distance between those two sentences is the entire history of pride, the entire arc of self-destruction, the entire map of what happens when a creature rejects the limits of its own nature and claims what belongs exclusively to the Creator. And here is what makes this story more than a cosmological theological account about a specific being, more than the origin of an entity that the texts call the adversary, more than a chapter in the history of the invisible universe. This story is the map of a pattern that repeats with frightening fidelity throughout all of human history. Because the material universe, what humans call reality, with its galaxies, its planets, its complex biology, its creatures of flesh and blood and history, was created in a context already marked by this fall. Eden was not the beginning of everything. It was the start of a chapter in a book that had already been disrupted. Adam and Eve were not approached by a neutral or indifferent creature. They were approached by a being who had passed through the complete cycle, from supreme glory to absolute ruin, and who carried with him not only the intention to deceive, but the intimate and visceral knowledge of what it means to want to be like God. The serpent did not tell Eve she could have more possessions. It did not promise more comfort, more pleasure, more security. It said, "You will be like God." The same words, the same logic, the same poison that had destroyed the most glorious being in the spiritual universe, now being offered to the most vulnerable creature in the material universe. And it worked. Because the logic of pride, the idea that what one has is not enough, that there is something more to be claimed, that the limits imposed by the Creator are obstacles and not protections. is a logic that resonates in any creature endowed with freedom and self-awareness. The legacy of Lucifer to humanity was not merely sin as an isolated act. It was the pattern of sin as an existential orientation, the internal structure of temptation, the logic that transforms the legitimate desire to grow into the corrosive refusal to serve. That converts natural ambition into spiritual rebellion. That causes a creature to look at what it possesses, which is immense, which is beautiful, which is sufficient, and still point upward and declare, "I want more, I want what does not belong to me, I want to be the center." The texts of the New Testament build the image with additional layers. Paul, writing to the Ephesians, calls Satan the prince of the power of the air and the prince of darkness of this age. Not simply a defeated and irrelevant spiritual being, but an active and organized force operating within human reality. John, in the book of Revelation, records that he deceives the whole world, all of human creation throughout all of history. Peter warns that he walks about like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Jesus, in the Gospel of John, calls him the father of lies and a murderer from the beginning, as if the lie were not merely a tactic he uses situationally, but part of what he has become. As if the lie is now his fundamental nature, because the truth about who he is and what he did has become simply unbearable to carry. There is a dimension in that statement of Jesus that goes beyond tactics. The father of lies, not an inventor of specific lies, but the origin of the lie as an existential category. The lie he introduced into the universe did not begin with Eve in Eden. It began when he lied to himself, when he convinced his own mind that the logic of pride was valid, when he decided, against all evidence, that the Creator was an obstacle to be overcome rather than a source to be worshipped, that the limits were prisons rather than protective structures, that being created was inferior to being the Creator. And that original lie, that primordial self-delusion, that fundamental distortion of reality still operates, still circulates, still finds echo in creatures made of dust, but who carry within themselves the same capacity for freedom and choice that made possible both the original glory of Lucifer and his definitive ruin. Before Adam breathed, before the serpent spoke, before the fruit was taken, the war had already begun. On a plane of existence that humans can barely imagine, a conflict began, and that conflict shaped everything that came after. The nature of temptation, the pattern of deception, the structure of evil that appears even today, always dressed in light. Because that is the most disturbing legacy of the story of Lucifer. He does not appear as a monster. He appears as an angel, as wisdom, as progress, as reason, exactly as he was before, only hollow within. That is how the devil was born, and he still remembers what it was like to be light.